Hi, I'm Jaclyn.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome to the episode that we are finally doing. It is a request from my dad. Sorry it took like a year, Dad. This was quite the endeavor. So this was my Courtney's honeymoon project that took me a long time to research. This is a two-parter, if you did not see from the episode title. If you were someone
pretty long two-parter. Could have possibly been three, but we're squeezing in two.
Yeah, we're gonna make it fit in two, so we're gonna keep the beginnings and ends pretty short so we can get to the gist of it. It is a two-parter. If you like to listen to both parts at once, you could go on over to patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes, where part 2 is already up there, ready to go for you for as little as $3 a month. So super cheap, and you get to listen to both parts at once. Or if you want to wait until part 2 comes out next week on the regular feed, we will hear you guys. Nope, we don't hear you. You hear us. You guys
hear you guys.
You guys will hear us then. Whew, I'm already messing up my words and we haven't even started. So we are going to jump into our updates so that we can get into this big ol' episode.
Yeah, and we have an update on America's favorite police officer, Derek Chauvin. You know, everyone loves him. Hope you can sense the sarcasm. So we talked a few weeks ago, a few episodes, don't know when, while ago, that he was having federal charges brought against him due to violating George Floyd's civil rights. And so he basically did plead guilty, and a judge did accept his plea. So they're likely going to sentence him to 20 to 25 years, but with credit time served, he may only be spending 17 to 21 years, and it will be concurrent with his state trial. So it's not like he'll spend 20 years in state prison, then go to federal prison. He's probably going to go straight to federal prison, which kind of sucks because that's what he wanted, because he thought he'd be safer. So that kind of sucks, but
yeah,
he did accept that plea. So maybe even when he gets out, he ain't going to have much of a life because nobody's going to forget. So
very true. Very true. And huge news in the true crime world this week, there was a case in 1977 known as the Girl Scouts murders. So Lori Farmer, Michelle Goose, and Danielle Milner were raped and murdered at a Girl Scout camp in 1977, and it has been unsolved since then, but DNA this week did reveal the murderer as Gene Leroy Hart. And I'm pretty sure he has been a suspect for quite a while, but they didn't have anything to arrest him on. Yeah, no hard evidence, but they do now. So he has been arrested. So he will finally go to trial for these crimes that he committed 40 something years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Almost 50, I feel like. Because 87, 97, 07, 17...
30 years ago. Yeah, definitely a lot more than 30 years. I have no sense of time. You know, it's like those memes where it's and someone's recently, and you're 2003. And now you're that was 20 years ago.
That was a long time ago, yeah.
Yeah, yikes.
But yeah, and this is another case where DNA has helped solve an unsolved crime. So hopefully we'll have a lot more of these going forward in the future.
Yes.
This next update is something that's currently going on. I do kind of hope by the time this is released that this is resolved, but since it's been going on this long, I wouldn't be surprised if somehow it's still going on. And that's on April 29th. Casey White was an inmate, and Vicky White was a correctionals officer, and she took him in a van and said they were going for a court date, took him in the van, left, and then eventually they found the van abandoned on the side of the road, and so they were like, oh no, this inmate overtook this correctional officer, all this, and then they discovered he didn't have a court date that day at all, and the correctional officer was actually retiring that day. So, the inmate was Casey White, and the correctional officer is Vicky White. They are not related, just so happens. And they apparently did have a romantic relationship going on. She had just sold her property that was worth almost $300,000 for $95,000. She retired, she did all this. So basically they're currently on the run, and it was just found out today that they did find the car they believe to be driving in Williamson County, Tennessee impound lot. So they think They likely abandoned it less than 4 hours after they escaped. So the car they've been sending out telling everyone to look for has been in an impound lot for a week. So
wow. So who knows what the hell vehicle they're in, where they could be. Wow.
And I mean, it's been a week. You could be anywhere in the country. You could be...
Yeah.
You could even be trying to sneak into Canada or Mexico at this point as well.
Yeah.
He
wow.
was...
So yeah,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So if they are still on the run at the time you guys are hearing this podcast, be on the lookout for them.
Yeah, definitely. And he was actually in jail. He had been arrested for kidnapping and attempted murder. And while he was in custody, he confessed to another murder as well. So I do worry about the safety for her as well. Like, he's a psychopath. Did he just, like manipulate her or whatever, convince her to help him? And then I'm worried for her safety as well, that he's just going to kill her once he's out like he wants. So look up their pictures. I feel like they both have very distinctive faces. Like, her face is very distinct. So, but I'm very, very shocked that this is like big news and nobody's seen them. So this seems very, very planned. Who knows what's happening?
Yeah, that is wild, and definitely interested to see where that goes.
Yeah.
And before we get started, we did want to give a shout out to one of our podcast friends, the pod part, I don't know, you guys know, podcaster friends, you know what I mean. So, our listener, Jamie, and her co-host, Kate, they have a podcast called Pushing Strollers Up Boulders. So it is about motherhood, specifically navigating motherhood in the world of this pandemic, just a whole new set of challenges that come up in this world now. So check them out. They do have a lot of great episodes. They speak to some different people. We will be on an episode that has already been released.
I think when this comes out, it will have been released the day before, because they release on Mondays, right?
Cool. Yep, perfect.
Yeah. So the day before this, it's already out. Go listen.
Yes, so we were on an episode with them talking about serial killers or killers with mommy issues in honor of Mother's Day. So go check that out and see what you guys think. We do talk about the one that we're going to talk about today, but obviously these two episodes will be much more in-depth. So
we didn't sit on their podcast and make them listen to us talking about Charles Manson for 6 hours.
Yeah, that would be quite a lot. But definitely check out that episode as well as all of their episodes, because they are super great and we love them. So thank you guys. And now, as much anticipated, we are going to get into the story of Charles Manson. So our sources for today were, of course, the book Helter Skelter, The True Story of the Manson Murders by Vincent Buglioso and Kurt Gentry. Bugliosi, that's probably not correct. He was the prosecutor for the trials. And as well as Member of the Family, My Story of Charles Manson, Life Inside His Cult and the Darkness That Ended the 60s by Diane Lake, who was a member of the Manson family. We also use charlesmanson.com, mansonfamily.net, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Newsweek, and LAist.
And all that's interesting.
Just left that one out. Okay. So Charles Manson will forever be known as the leader of a killer hippie cult that orchestrated the murder of at least 9 individuals. So how did someone become this evil and recruit others to join in his beliefs? Like, how does someone convince others to murder for him? So in this 2-part episode, we'll tell you all about how this came to be. At around 8 a.m. on August 9th, 1969, housekeeper Winifred Chapman arrived at the house located at 10050 Cielo Drive in Beverly Hills, California, where she was employed by film director Roman Polanski and his wife, actress Sharon Tate. The large house was in a secluded area. There were still Christmas lights hung up from the previous tenants. Mrs. Chapman noticed that the telephone wire was hanging over the gate, so she was afraid that something had happened and the electricity was out. But their security gate was working like normal. She did also notice that there was a light on the side of the garage that wasn't normally left on. So she turned the light off, and then she noticed an unfamiliar white Rambler that was parked out front. So while she didn't recognize the vehicle, the tenants of the house often had guests, so it wasn't unusual for her to see a strange car in the morning. Like, they would have friends over, they would stay the night. So, she didn't recognize the car, but nothing seemed out of place yet. So the front door was ajar, and when she entered, she came upon what would become one of the most gruesome and infamous crime scenes to date. So the room was covered in blood, with writing on the wall, and there were 2 dead bodies on the floor. Mrs. Chapman immediately ran outside, and that's when she noticed another body in the driver's seat of the Rambler. She ran to the closest neighbor's house, yelling that there had been a murder and there were bodies in the home. A 15-year-old neighbor called police at 8:33 a.m., and they arrived shortly after. So 10050 Cielo Drive was owned by Rudy Altobelli, who was currently living in Europe, and he had rented the house to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, and had hired William Garretson to live in the guest house and care for his dogs and the property while he was away. So Polanski and Tate had been in Europe for a while as well, so their friends Voytek Frykowski and Abigail Folger stayed in the house while they were out of the country. So Sharon, who was 8.5 months pregnant, returned home from Europe in July, and Wojtek and Abigail decided to stay with her since Roman was still away working on his movie in Europe. When asked whose bodies had been in the house, Mrs. Chapman says she didn't know, but she recognized Jay Sebring's car outside. So Sebring was a prominent hairstylist and the friend and former boyfriend of Sharon Tate. So police approached the house slowly because they didn't know if the killer or killers were still inside the house. And inside the Rambler, they did find the body of a teenage boy with red hair. He was slumped over towards the passenger seat. He had 1 defensive wound on his hand and had been shot 4 times. There were also 2 bodies on the front lawn. The first was a male about 18 to 20 feet past the front door. He was a white male in his 30s and was lying on his side with his head resting on his arm and his arm clutching the grass. He had been hit in the head 13 times, shot twice, and stabbed 51 times. So clearly just the definition of overkill here.
Mm-hmm.
And about 25 feet away was the body of a white female. She was in her late 20s with dark hair and was barefoot in her nightgown, and she had been stabbed 28 times. Police found that a window screen had been removed and slit, and there was another open window in the home as well. When police entered the front door, they noticed the word pig written in blood on it, and inside there were 2 big blue steamer trunks that Mrs. Chapman said weren't there the day before when she left the home. Next to the trunks were a pair of horn-rimmed glasses and 2 small pieces of wood. They then discovered the body of pregnant Sharon Tate behind the couch. She was lying on her side in just a bra and underwear, and blood was smeared all over her body. A white nylon rope was looped twice around her neck, with one end extended over the rafters in the ceiling and the other wrapped around another body, which was located about 4 feet away. She had been stabbed 16 times. The final body was a white male in his 30s with dark hair, and he had been stabbed 7 times and shot once. So police searched the whole house because they didn't know if the murderer or murderers were still there, and as they exited the house through the back door where the pool was, they heard a dog barking and a man's voice coming from the guest house. So police approached with guns and found 18-year-old William Garretson. Garretson claims that the police knocked him down and dragged him out of the house. The officers there said that they ordered him down on the ground and maybe he fell, but they didn't remember, which we all know
who I believe.
For. Right, exactly. So they asked him to identify the bodies outside, and he mistakenly identified one as the housekeeper, one as the young Polanski, and he said he wasn't able to identify the teenage boy in the Rambler, although police would later find out that he did know him. So when asked where he had been the night before, Garretson said he had been in the guest house and had been up all night writing letters and listening to records, but that he didn't hear anything. They didn't believe it was possible that he could be so close and wouldn't hear 5 heinous murders. So that, along with his shaky alibi, led to his immediate arrest. So Officer DeRosa called it in at 9:40 a.m., reporting 5 murder victims and a suspect in custody. So they've been there a little over an hour. They've already arrested this dude for these 5 murders.
Yeah. They're like, wow, easy day at work today.
Right? This is nice and quick. So 4 West Los Angeles detectives were called to the scene, and by the time they all arrived at the scene, reporters were already outside the gate. They're just surrounding the area. Because the area was hot and dry and prone to fires, the news reached the public at first as 5 deaths by fire. Jay Sebring's name was mentioned since the housekeeper had noticed his car outside, so these little bits of facts are making their way to reporters who were then sharing this. So when someone heard his name on the news and tried to get a hold of him, both his butler and secretary said they hadn't heard from him since the previous afternoon. So Jay had previously lived with Sharon Tate, so they reached out to Sharon's parents to see if they had spoken with him, because they were actually friends, like outside of his relationship with Sharon, like he hung out with her parents too. So they had not heard from him, and they had not spoken with Sharon either. So Sharon's mother tried calling her, but the phone just kept ringing. So Mrs. Tate then called Sandy, who was one of Sharon's friends and the wife of William Tennant, Roman Polanski's business manager. So she said that she had spoken with Sharon the previous afternoon, and that Sharon said Abigail and Voytek were planning on staying in that night, and Jay was going to stop by later. She invited Sandy to join as well, but Sandy declined because she was just getting over the chicken pox. Sandy then tried to call Sharon as well that morning, but wasn't able to get an answer.
How sad to know, like, hindsight. Like, if you had stayed, you would probably be dead too. And also, like, again, we talk about this even today with, like, Kobe Bryant, it getting reported in the news before contacting families or even knowing they're positively identified. Like, obviously, Jay was a victim, but, like, how many times has it been reported, like, oh, his car was there, he's dead, and it's like, but maybe he's not? Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, at this point, none of the bodies have been identified, and Sharon Tate was recognizable, you know, she was an actress, but everyone else, honestly, was mutilated so badly that it wouldn't be easy to recognize immediately, you know?
And that's the thing, too, is, like, you can also assume it's Sharon Tate because it's her house. So you're like, okay, she probably is there. Who else is there? We don't know. But, I mean, we don't even technically know it's her. I mean, you do because she's recognizable, but it's like, hold on now. Don't be just throwing shit out.
Yeah, and we'll get into it, but a lot of the information reported too was also just false. So it's like... So William Tennant arrived just before noon to identify the bodies. He did not recognize the man in the car, but he identified the bodies on the lawn as Voytek Frykowski and Abigail Folger. In the living room, he identified Sharon Tate and possibly Jay Sebring, but his face was so damaged that he wasn't positive. But he's like, pretty much looks like him. It's his car. I feel like that's a reasonable guess here. And then William threw up outside after identifying the bodies, as I'm sure most of us would.
Yeah.
So officers were in charge of keeping the reporters back away from the gate, but 2 officers did speak to the media, and one said, it's like a battlefield up there, and another said it looked ritualistic. So as you can imagine, the media just went wild with this story and those quotes. The first news story was released by AP, and the headline read, 5 slain in Bel Air. No bodies had been identified at the time it was released, but again, the story was just full of errors that kept being repeated, such as one victim having a hood over his head and things like that just, you know, like the game Telephone, all the information makes its way to the last person, and it's not really accurate, but then it gets released into the media, so.
And then people believe it as, like, fact too. Like, I wonder so much, like, we talk about the Mandela effect, you know, like, how much of that is like false information and just never hearing the correction. Like, so many people think like Nelson Mandela was killed in like the 80, I don't remember when they thought he was killed. You know, like, they thought he died in prison. It's like, no, he was alive. So it's like someone probably just reported that and no one ever corrected it, and so you're just like, I read it one time and then you remember it, like.
Yeah, and like we've talked about before, that also makes it so hard when we're doing these older cases, when you're relying on newspaper articles, because they may say 10 different things and who knows what's right and what's not. So LAPD notified the family members of the deceased. Roman Polanski was in his townhouse in London going over a scene in the script The Day of the Dolphin with some of his associates when William Tennant called and said there had been a disaster at the house and Sharon, Voytek, Abigail, and Jay were dead. So Polanski originally thought that it was a landslide that had destroyed the house and killed his wife and friends, because landslides were common in that area, and you just get a call that there was a disaster and everyone's dead. I mean, that's a pretty reasonable guess. But Tennant told him that they had actually been murdered. So at this point, news is quickly spreading, along with lots of rumors, such as the fact that Gerritsen had already confessed, which he had not. So there was a bloody smear left on the button of the gate, indicating that the killer possibly pressed the button when leaving and left a fingerprint. He would not have left a footprint. He left a fingerprint.
Kicked it in.
But Officer DeRosa pressed the button to open the gate and therefore destroyed any fingerprint that would have been left there. So
the 60s,
good old officers. Tainting the time screen.
60s, 70s, they just need to go to jail.
I just said time screen.
What?
I said they were tainting the time screen instead of the crime scene.
Y'all, we're only like not even a fourth of the way through this. Y'all are in for a good episode.
Whew, okay. We have a little bit more coffee and get to this. Okay. So a representative from the telephone company climbed the pole outside the gate between 10 and 11 a.m. and found that 4 phone wires had been cut. They were cut pretty close to the pole, so he believed that whoever had done this had also climbed the pole in the same manner because you got to be right up there to cut them that close. Mm-hmm. And as more officers began arriving on the scene, the crime scene became more and more contaminated. The horn-rimmed glasses were now 6 feet away and on top of a desk instead of on the floor. And the 2 pieces of wood that were determined to be pieces of gun grip were under a chair in the living room instead of in the entryway. And now a 3rd piece of gun grip was found on the front porch. So things are just getting moved all over the place. We don't know what the hell's happening. Mm-hmm. More bloody footprints were tracked into the house, making it difficult to identify any that had been there when the first officers arrived on the scene. So Officer Joe Granado gathered 45 blood samples from the scene for testing. However, he missed several spots because there was just so much blood from so many different individuals. So he's like taking samples from different places all over the house, but it's like in the book, Bugliosi, whatever his name is, I mean, he talks a lot of shit about the LAPD, which I get, but also I feel like, I mean, how are you going to test every single inch of blood in that entire house? You know, like, I feel like it's, I don't know, that's a tough one. And he also did not run subtypes on 21 of these samples. So if this is not done within a week or 2 of collection, the components of the blood break down and it's impossible to test. So this would cause issues later on when they attempted to recreate the murders.
Yeah, I could see that one, like, not testing it immediately because it's like, what are you waiting for? 5 people, including, like, this director's wife, actress, like, famous person is dead and you're just not going to do anything?
Like, yeah, I'll just hang on to these, see what happens, you know? Especially for something that can't be done later. It's not like like evidence we know, or like DNA evidence, which obviously wasn't a thing then, but like you can preserve it for years and years and test it and still be able to test it, but that's not how this blood typing works. So more forensic analysts arrived on the scene and began collecting fingerprints. So it did take 6 hours to gather prints from both the main house and the guest house. They collected a total of 50 prints, after excluding those that belonged to LAPD. So 7 of those belonged to William Garretson, but all 7 of them were found in the guest house. So none of his fingerprints were found in the main house. They did find 15 prints belonging to the victims, and 3 of them were not clear enough for comparison, which left 25 unmatched prints that could belong to the killer or killers. Again, these people had lots of parties, lots of friends over, people in and out. As we'll talk about later when we go over the day, I mean, they had gardeners and housekeepers, you know, tons of people in the house. So this is going to be hard. So after verifying that the deaths were not accidental or self-inflicted, the case was reassigned to the robbery homicide division.
I don't mean to laugh, but it's like, oh, we figured
obvious.
Out. Like real hard job there figuring that one out.
I don't think this was an accident. I don't think they did it to themselves. So we're going to move this over here. So the first homicide detectives arrived around 1:30 p.m. and the Los Angeles County Coroner arrived around 1:45 p.m. to examine the bodies. There were no signs of sexual assault, and 3 of the victims, the John Doe from the car, Jay Sebring, and Voytek Frykowski, had been shot. So John Doe had not been stabbed, but the other 4 victims were stabbed repeatedly. Sebring had also been hit in the face, and Freykowski had been struck over the head with a blunt object. So they determined that the gun used had likely been a .22 caliber, and the depth and thickness of the stab wounds ruled out a kitchen knife or a pocket knife, but the only 2 knives found in the house were a kitchen knife and a pocket knife. So the steak knife was found in the kitchen sink, and it reacted positively for blood, but it was later determined to be animal blood and not human blood. The pocket knife was found wedged behind the cushion of one of the chairs with the blade sticking up, and the housekeeper did not recall seeing that knife before, so it was speculated that it may have belonged to the killers. So investigators begin attempting to understand this bizarre crime scene and to look for any clues. So they're wondering, like, is there a significance to Sharon and Jay being bound together? Where did these steamer trunks come from? Who do the glasses belong to? Just lots of weird things that are not making sense. They're trying to figure out, are any of these things clues? A clock in John Doe's car also stopped at 12:15 a.m. So they're like, is this the time of death? Police also found MDA, cocaine, and weed inside the house. So they're wondering, was this a drug deal or like a drug party gone wrong? Nothing was taken from the house, so they didn't suspect a robbery. And police wondered if this was a situation of a hired killer, but they thought it was just too messy and chaotic for that. Like, a hitman's going to come in, he's going to shoot everybody, he's going to leave. He's not going to have this frenzied killing, stabbing, chasing,
Yeah.
So much information was leaked to the media that it was hard for officers to interview anyone because everyone already knew everything that any of the killers would have known. So there's nothing being saved here. So they did find out from interviews that the neighbor at 10070 Cielo Drive heard 3 or 4 gunshots around 12:30 or 1 a.m. And about 3/4 of a mile away, a man named Tim Ireland was camping with 35 children from his school when he heard a man saying, "Oh God, please don't," around 12:40 a.m. A private security guard that had been hired by some nearby residents reported hearing gunshots around 4 a.m. So the Los Angeles Times delivery man did not notice anything unusual when he dropped the paper off around 4:30 to 4:45 a.m., but he did notice that the light was on outside of the garage and that a phone wire was hanging over the gate. So starting to get an idea here that these murders probably occurred between 12 and 4 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
So forensics determined that the blood on the gun grip was human and the type matched Jay Sebring, so this was possibly the object that had hit him in the head. The blood from the word pig only matched Sharon's blood type, and investigators believed that the knife used was most likely some kind of bayonet, and a total of 43 officers searched the house in the days after the murders. Again, the media just blew up with this case. There were tons of rumors, including one that a lot of porn was found, but there was only one home movie of Sharon and Roman having sex that was found. So, like, the media is trying to report, oh, it was like a porn house, and it's like they had one movie of themselves. That's not unusual. So, meanwhile, Gerritsen was being questioned by police. He said he was hired as a caretaker by the homeowner, and he just lived in the guest house and didn't have much to do with the people in the main house. So he said the night of the murders, he walked down to the Sunset Strip around 8:30 or 9 to buy cigarettes and a TV dinner, and he guessed he returned around 10 p.m. He said he did not enter the main house when he arrived home, but that everything had looked normal from the outside. His friend Steve Parent came by and tried to sell him a clock around 11:45 p.m. So he demonstrated how it worked, but Gerritsen said he wasn't interested, and after about 30 minutes, Steve left and said he was going to meet another friend. So eventually, both police and journalists ran a check on the Rambler's license plate and determined that it belonged to Wildred and Juanita Parent. So their 18-year-old son Steve had never returned home the night before, and an El Monte officer went to the parents' home and handed them a card with a phone number to call. Like, literally just, here's a card with a phone number, see you later. Mm-hmm. So they're like, okay. So they called this number, and it was the county coroner's office. So they're just like, some officer just gave me your number, and they're like, are you looking for a body? And they're like, my son didn't come home last night. Like, this is all I know at this point. Like, my son didn't come home, and now this officer is handing me a phone number to a coroner's office. So the coroner said they did have a body and described their son. So John Doe was officially identified as 18-year-old Steve Parent, which, what a shitty fucking way for those police officers to make this, to share this information with his parents. Like, what? Like, who would do that?
Well, I mean, look at what they've done with the rest of the case. Roman Polanski only found out his wife was dead from his, I can't remember. His manager? What was that?
Yeah, his business manager.
I was like, what was his title? I could not remember
that person,
his title.
From not the police.
And then, like, Sharon's parents and probably Jay's parents were just hearing that, you know, his car was found at the house. And so it's like, the police are just, like, not informing anyone. They're just being, like, super shitty with all of this. They're just like, you'll find out when you find out. I don't know.
Like, you don't need to know at this time, apparently. So the clock found with Steve's body had stopped at 12:15, like we said. So based on Gerritsen's story, police are guessing that, like, he had plugged in the clock and was showing Gerritsen how it worked, and then he unplugged it, so it was stopped at 12:15, And then they're assuming that he was murdered on his way to his car, or getting into his car, since that's where his body was found. So they're assuming that all of the murders occurred likely around 12:15. So William Garretson did pass the polygraph. So police believed that maybe he had heard something, but he was too scared to say anything. Again, we know polygraphs are not admissible, but it is a clue to go off of, and there were no signs that he was aware of anything when he took this polygraph.
Yeah, and I mean, like, obviously, hindsight, we know it wasn't him, but it is pretty crazy that you're like, I don't know this person, and then it's like your friend that you just saw who'd come, and like, you are on the property and you say you don't hear anything. Again, he could be like terrified, like, I don't know who's out there killing, and I'm not going to say what I heard, because who knows. But yeah, it is pretty suspicious, like, not knowing who actually did it.
Yeah, but I feel like, I mean, I definitely understand his behavior as like, what the hell, like, you're the only person still on this property, like, in a guest house nearby, and you're like, no, I didn't hear anything, when all these neighbors reported hearing things. But I can also see, too, if you were in the house, you knew nothing about it, and you're leaving and you're seeing your friend that was there the night before, and you're just like, I can't compute what's happening right now, like, what,
or even being like, oh my god, they're gonna think it's me, I can't tell them I know this person.
Yeah,
I was on the property. I can't tell them I heard anything. They're gonna think it was me. So
exactly.
I definitely get it.
I don't know this person. Yeah, they won't make the connection to me. Yeah, for sure.
So police now know that the 5 victims are Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, Jay Sebring, Voytek Frykowski, and Steve Parent. So Sharon Tate was born in Dallas, Texas in 1943 and was named Miss Tiny Tot of Dallas at just 6 months old. So you know she must have been a real cute baby.
Oh yeah.
And at 16 years old, she was named Miss Richland, Washington, and then Miss Autorama. And her father was an army officer, and when he was assigned to San Pedro, Sharon began hitchhiking to Los Angeles to the studios, and she did have dreams of becoming an actress. So she did get an agent, and she started with some commercials before auditioning for Petticoat Junction. And producer Martin Ranshoff said that he was going to make her a star. And she got parts in the Beverly Hillbillies and films like The Americanization of Emily and The Sandpiper. She did fall in love with Big Sur, and she would escape there with like no makeup, and she could just, you know, walk the trails and spend time on the beach, and no one there really like knew who she was. They didn't know that she was a movie star. So she kind of got to be an actress, but also get away and just kind of be like a normal person. Mm-hmm. And she was in a relationship with a French actor who once beat her so badly she had to go to the hospital. So after her murder, Sharon's parents told police about him and that he had actually gotten into an argument with Jay just days before the murders. He was checked out and his alibi was cleared. So they're like, okay, maybe it's not him. And after breaking up with the abusive boyfriend, she actually became romantically involved with Jay Sebring, and they were together until she met Roman Polanski. So Sharon's first feature role was in Eye of the Devil in 1965, and she was filming in London, which is where she met Polanski at a studio preview. And the couple did get married on January 20th, 1968, and on February 12th, 1969, they started renting the house at 10050 CeeLo Drive for $1,200 a month. Which I was like, that sounds so cheap, but I know in 1969 money that's not cheap.
Yeah.
So the couple was preparing to welcome their first child at the time of Sharon's death. We did say she was 8.5 months pregnant. And her autopsy would later show that their son likely survived for some time after his mother was killed, and that he may have survived if she had been found sooner, which is just another tragic part of this story.
Yeah, that is just awful.
So Jay Sebring was born Thomas John Coomer in Detroit, Michigan, and later changed his name after moving to Hollywood. I can see why. Jay Sebring sounds a lot more Hollywood than Thomas Coomer.
Yes.
So prior to the move, he worked as a Navy barber for 4 years, and then after the move, he became a famous hairstylist with clients such as Frank Sinatra, Paul Newman, and Steve McQueen. He had been married for a few years, but he was divorced and he didn't have any children. He was kind of known as like a ladies' man, and he dated frequently. And during the investigation, many of his former sexual partners told stories of him tying them up and whipping them, but they all said that they'd consented and no one thought he was violent. So it was like he just kind of enjoyed this thing sexually, but we all consented to it. It wasn't like forced, you know? And then Abigail Ann Folger was 25 years old and the heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, and her friends called her Gibby. She attended Radcliffe and graduated with honors, and she worked for a while as the publicity director for the University of California Art Museum in Berkeley, and she then moved to New York, where she worked in a bookstore for a while before turning to social work. So Abigail met Wojtek in New York in 1968, and they decided to move to LA together in August. Wojtek knew Polanski and introduced Abigail to him, Sharon, and Jay. And after moving, Abigail registered as a volunteer social work for the Los Angeles County Welfare Department, and she continued this work until the day they moved into the house on Cielo Drive. So she did become bitter and a hard time removing herself from her work at the end of the day. So she did give it up. She was like, it's just a little bit too taxing on my mental health. Like, especially when you're volunteering, you know, it's kind of like, oof, can't do this anymore.
I mean, there is a huge turnover in social work for that exact reason.
Yeah.
So
you're also the heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, and you don't really need this job either. you know,
they're like, oh, just pass on that.
So she also started doing drugs around this time, and at the time of her death, she had an appointment with her psychiatrist 5 days a week, and she was actually working up the courage to leave Voytek. So, Voytek Frykowski was 32 years old, and he was from Poland, as you can hear me stumbling over his name, trying very hard to say it right. Had a degree in chemistry, but he did hang out with a lot of filmmakers, so he became friends with Roman Polanski in Poland and financed one of his projects. Polanski described him as good-natured, soft-hearted, to the point of sentimentality, and utterly loyal. Using a lot of big words there.
I did not realize that sentimentality was a word, and I also had to spell it multiple times to get it right, because that's quite a word.
Yeah. But it sounds like he was a good friend and a good person.
Yeah.
He had been married twice and had one son named Bartek. His friends said that he had great ideas and grand plans, but he never really followed through with anything. So he was kind of into drugs, and so friends said, like, we'd loan him money to go toward these, like, grand plans. It sounded amazing, and then nothing really ever came of it. And he moved from Poland to New York in 1967, which is where he met Abigail. Stephen Parent was the oldest of 4 children and lived in El Monte with his family. He had just graduated from Arroyo High School in June, and he was fascinated with electronics and liked taking them apart to see how they worked. And during the day, he worked doing deliveries for a plumbing company, and he was also a salesman at a stereo shop in the evenings. So he was working like 2 jobs to save money for college. He really liked electronics. Like, it really seemed, you know, like he had big dreams of where he was going to go.
Yeah, and it makes me so sad in this case because I feel like he gets forgotten a lot because the others were celebrities and so high profile. I mean, you have an actress married to Roman Polanski, you have the heiress of the Folger coffee fortune, you have this famous hairstylist, and then you just have this 18-year-old kid who was in the wrong, I mean, they were all in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I feel like his name isn't known. I feel like he gets forgotten in this case.
Yeah. So now we're going to kind of shift to another set of murders that was happening around this time. So around 9 p.m. the night the bodies had been found, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca and Suzanne Struthers, which was Rosemary's 21-year-old daughter, left a cabin where they had been visiting their son, Frank Struthers Jr., and his friends. So the cabin was at Lake Isabel, which was about 150 miles from their home in LA. And on the way, they had heard on the radio the news about the murders at Cielo Drive. So Rosemary was very worried about this and had told a friend a few weeks before that someone had gone into her house while she was away and had gone through her things. So she was like kind of nervous, like these murders happened and now like some stuff's happening in our house, like what's going on? She said things were moved around and the dogs were outside instead of inside where she had left him. So they did drop Susan off at her apartment at around 1 a.m. Sunday morning, August 10th, and before going home, they stopped by John Focchiano's newsstand. So Focchiano's remembered them because they were regular customers, and he remembered that they discussed the Tate murders, which were obviously front page news. He said it was between 1 and 2 a.m. when he spoke with them, but probably closer to 2 because the bars closed soon after and a lot of people came to the newsstand. So he was like, I think it was around this time based off of every other night I'm here. Mm-hmm. So Sunday night, 15-year-old Frank Struthers Jr. returned home from the cabin he was visiting, and his mom and stepdad had brought him home like their boat from the cabin the night before, and Frank thought it was odd that the boat was still attached to their vehicle because his stepdad just never left it out overnight. Like, he wouldn't be lazy like that. He would take the time to, like, put it up. Mm-hmm. And he also noticed that all of the shades were drawn, which they'd never been before. So no one answered when he knocked on the door, and he was afraid something was wrong, so he walked to a payphone to call the house, and there was still no answer. So he called his sister Suzanne, and she said that she hadn't seen them since they dropped her off at the apartment the night before. She and her boyfriend picked Frank up and went to the house. Inside, they found Leno on his back in the living room with a pillow over his face, a cord around his neck, and his pajamas torn, and a fork sticking out of his stomach. There was something written on blood on the refrigerator as well, and they could tell immediately that he was dead, and they didn't want to disturb the crime scene, so they're already better than the LAPD. So they immediately left the house to contact police.
And police come in and probably fuck up the crime scene.
And they trample all through it. So the call came into LAPD at 10:26 p.m., So police arrived and also discovered that the cord around Leno's neck was attached to a lamp and his hands were tied behind his back. He'd been stabbed in the stomach with a carving fork, and the word war had been carved into his skin as well. His autopsy would also later show that another knife had been stuck in his throat as well, and that he'd been stabbed 12 times and had 12 puncture wounds from the fork. So the police found Rosemary in the master bedroom, and she was lying face down in a pool of blood and wearing both a dress and a nightgown that were bunched up over her head. There was a pillowcase over her head and a lamp cord wrapped around her neck and tied to a nearby lamp. The lamp had been pulled over and looked like maybe she'd tried to crawl away while she was tied up. There were too many stab wounds to count, like, initially, but the autopsy would show that she'd been stabbed 41 times. So here's another one where it's, like, just over the top. Mm-hmm. On the wall, Death to Pigs and Rise had been written in blood, and Helter Skelter had been written and spelled incorrectly on the refrigerator. Frank said the only items missing were Rosemary's wallet and watch, but many other expensive items were left behind, so robbery didn't really appear to me to be a motive, because, like, why would you take a wallet and not all the expensive shit in the house?
Yeah.
So, police found a piece of blood-soaked paper that was maybe used to write the words, as well as watermelon rinds in the sink. There was no obvious signs of forced entry, but the door wasn't very secure and was easy to break into. So, fingerprints had been wiped from surfaces, so the killers had obviously been trying to cover their tracks. Fear spread around Los Angeles because the citizens now knew a killer was on the loose. And Garretson was in custody at the time of these murders, so they knew he can't be responsible for them. And the likelihood that he was also responsible for the Tate murders was decreasing as well. So it's like, I don't really think these two murders are going to happen and, like, it not be him. Like,
yeah, they're like,
yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And I also wonder, because, like, the media was reporting everything, if that's why everything was wiped down. Like, clearly they're, like, listening to the news and being like, oh, we left fingerprints last time? Wipe. Like,
yep, make sure we don't this time.
So one sporting goods store usually sold around a few firearms a day, but actually sold 200 in one day shortly after the murders. I think we see this a lot with, like, serial killers. Like, people buy guns and people buy new locks for their doors and all that kind of stuff, because you're like, oh, Lord.
Yep.
Leno LaBianca was born Pasqualino Antonio LaBianca in Los Angeles in 1925. So his parents did... What'd I say wrong?
I just laughing at you almost messing up Los Angeles after getting through his name in Los Angeles. Yeah. You're like, wait, I know this one.
Wait, this one seems too easy. Los Angeles. Whew. I'm sweaty. All right. So his parents immigrated from Italy in early 1900s and started a grocery store business. So Leno was a good student and he ran track in high school where he was given the nickname Flash. Leno attended the University of Southern California where he studied business administration before being drafted into the U.S. Army in 1943. He did serve as a military policeman and married his first wife, who was also his high school sweetheart, in 1944. He was stationed in Europe for 18 months during World War II, and the couple had 3 children together, but they did split up in 1955, and Leno took over his family's grocery business after his father's death and became president of Gateway Markets. He also owned 9 racehorses and was a chronic gambler who was $200,000 in debt. That gambling will get you quick. So, Rosemary was born sometime around 1929. Little is known of her early years, but it is believed that she was born in Mexico and was orphaned or abandoned in Arizona at a young age. So she did stay in an orphanage until she was 12, and she then was adopted by a family named Harmon that moved her to California. She met her first husband, Frank Struthers, in the late 1940s, working as a car hop at a drive-in. They had 2 children named Suzanne and Frank before splitting up in 1958. So Rosemary and Leno met while she was working as a waitress at the Los Feliz Inn in 1959, and they married in Las Vegas. So she converted a truck into a mobile dress shop, which later became a business called Boutique Carriage. And her business partner said she also invested in stocks that did well, and she had over $2.5 million in assets at the time of her death. So these 2 together were doing pretty well besides that whole debt thing.
Besides the whole debt thing, yeah.
Yeah. So the day of their murders, Rosemary's business partner's wife had gone over to their house at about 6 p.m. to feed their 3 dogs while they were out of town. And the dog food was kept in the refrigerator, and she touched the handle, so it had been wiped clean sometime after that because her fingerprints or even smudges weren't on the handle. The coroner gave conflicting information on the time of death and eventually settled on between 12:30 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. on Sunday, which is not exactly helpful.
No, not in the slightest bit. Because they're like, oh, from the time you were seen by this person to the time you were seen by this person. Yeah, it happened somewhere in there. Good job, coroner. Great job putting that education to use there.
Frank said that Leno was a creature of habit, and he bought the paper every night and read it before going to bed, starting with the sports section. So the paper was open to the sports section on the coffee table with Leno's glasses next to it, and the bed hadn't been slept in yet, so detectives are concluding it was likely between 2 and 3 a.m., and police were adamant that these murders were not connected to the Tate murders because they were not close in proximity, the victims did not know each other, and they're still hung up on this idea that the Tate murders were because of drugs, and that's it. So they're like, well, this couple, they're not on drugs, but the Tate murders, that was drugs. Even though you have, like, writing and blood, and you're like, I don't think it's connected.
No, I don't think they have anything to do with each other. We see that all the time. So these have no connection here.
Super, super common.
Yeah.
On August 12th, police told reporters that a connection between the 2 murders had been ruled out. So now they're like, there's no connection whatsoever. And they continued investigating people that each group knew personally, as they didn't believe either of them were murdered by strangers. So while Leno was in debt, they didn't really believe his gambling to be a motive because Rosemary was independently wealthy and had more than enough assets to cover his gambling debt.
Yeah, so like we don't think that had anything to do with it, which also when I read that I was like, I mean, I don't feel like that's necessarily like yes, this has nothing to do with it, because especially in the 60s, if it's like your wife's money, like are you going to acknowledge like, hey, I need your money because I got myself in gambling debt, or would you just allow yourself to be in trouble with like these loan sharks versus asking to take your wife's money because you're acknowledging that like you're not the breadwinner? I don't know.
The only thing I could think is if they believed someone came to the house to murder him over the debt, that Rosemary could be like, I have the money, don't kill me too. You know what I'm saying? Where she could be like, okay, here's some money, cover his gambling debts. I'm not happy about it, but I'm not dead, so.
Yeah, that's true, because usually in that case, like, if you're willing to pay, they're not going to kill you because they want your money. So
yeah.
it's like,
because if you're dead, they're not going to get their money. Like,
exactly.
They don't want to kill you.
Yeah. So 2 homicide detectives reached out to a detective assigned to the Tate case and said that on July 31st, a 34-year-old music teacher named Gary Hinman had been stabbed to death, and the words "political piggy" were written on the wall in the victim's blood. So Hinman was described as a kind and gentle soul. He was a Buddhist and was planning a spiritual trip to Japan soon. And in addition to being a music teacher, he was also close to earning a PhD in sociology from UCLA. So Robert Bobby Busolet had been arrested on August 6th, driving the victim's car with his blood on his shirt and pants and a knife hidden in the tire well of the car. So if you're talking about evidence, that's pretty solid here. You're in his car, you have his blood on you. Sounds pretty good. So Bobby was a hippie that lived at Spahn's movie ranch, which was near Chatsworth, so where some old like Western movies used to be filmed. So Bobby lived out here with a group of hippies and their leader Charlie, who said he was Jesus Christ. So because Bobby was in custody, yeah, sounds good. So because Bobby was in custody on August 6th, they know that he could not have committed these murders, but the detectives are like, these are too similar, like maybe you should check out this group at Spahn Ranch that he lived with, like something to check out here. But the detective on the Tate murder was like, no, the Tate murders are related to drugs. They don't have anything to do with this. So he didn't even bring this other murder up to his supervisor. He decided they weren't connected and there was nothing to look into further. So he's like, nope, now we're good, thanks. Yeah. So the Tate investigators found out that there had been an argument with some party crashers at the Cielo Drive house a few months before the murders, so they tracked down and interviewed these suspects extensively, but nothing came of that. The LaBianca investigators ruled out any gambling or mafia connections. They did discover that a previous tenant in a neighboring house was an attorney who had mental health problems and claimed to black out for periods of time and not be responsible for his actions. So he had attempted to murder his wife of 2 weeks and had multiple drug arrests as well. So he had skipped bail and was on the run at the time of the murders, so police focused on finding him. So the Tate investigators reconstructed the victim's day on August 8th to search for anything unusual and to find any additional witnesses or suspects to interview. So the housekeeper, Mrs. Chapman, arrived at the house on Cielo Drive at 8 a.m., and a painter who was painting the baby's nursery arrived at 8:30. He removed the screens from the windows before starting, and at 11, Roman Polanski called and confirmed with Sharon that he would be home on August 12th. Sharon told Mrs. Chapman that she had enrolled Roman in a class for expectant fathers. She also received some phone calls about some kittens that she was caring for. When the previous tenant, Terry Melcher, had moved out, he had left several cats, and they multiplied with some stray cats, and so Sharon was now taking care of 26 cats, as well as her dog and Abigail's dog. So she's got a lot going on. Right. So around noon, Mrs. Chapman noticed that there were paw prints on the front door, and so she washed down the outside with vinegar and water, which will be important later. So Steve worked for the plumbing company and came home for lunch, and he asked his mom to lay out his clothes so that he could quickly change for his second job when he got home. 2 of Sharon's friends came over for lunch around 12:30, and as mentioned earlier, Sandy Tennant called around 1, and Sharon invited her over that night. So Hollywood rumors said that a party was planned for that night. So all these people are like, oh yeah, like I was invited, but I decided like not to go. Like, oh my God, that could have been me. Mm-hmm. But then the people that knew Sharon were like, there was no party. Like there was the group of people that was there. And then she also invited Sandy. That was it. Like there was no party planned, but you have all these people who like want to be a part of this. And they're like, oh, I was invited and I could have been murdered, but I wasn't.
From what I've found, and this is obviously not the same thing, but I did just get married, and people love to make other people's things about them. They love it. They love it. So, like, like, even though it was Kevin and I's wedding, everyone else liked to make it about them. And the same goes with, like, funerals and, like, this case, like, murders, where they were like, oh, my God, it could have been me. It was me. And it's like, I understand you were like, maybe I go to that house a lot. That's crazy that this happened. But, like, don't be inserting yourself where you don't belong.
Yeah, this isn't your thing. So the painter left around 1:30 and left the screens off the windows because he planned on returning on Monday to finish the job. Abigail purchased a bike around 2 p.m. and scheduled it to be delivered to the house later that day. The Gardners arrived at the house around the same time, and shortly after that, Wojtek and Abigail came home and joined Sharon and her friends for lunch. Her friends did leave around 3:30. And then sometime in the mid-afternoon, Jay's butler served him and his date coffee in bed, and around 3:45, he called Sharon and said that he would be over earlier than expected. Mrs. Chapman and one of the Gardners left the house around 4 p.m., and the other Gardner stayed behind to finish the job. So the shipment of blue steamer trunks arrived, and the Gardner signed for them because he saw that Sharon was asleep and he didn't want to disturb her. So the receipt shows that he signed for them at 4:30 p.m., and they did contain Sharon's clothes that Roman had shipped over from London. So there's one clue kind of ruled out, because they're like, do these trunks have anything to do with these murders? But they did not. Abigail had her usual 4:30 appointment with her psychiatrist, and Stephen Parent got off work and went to his other job around 5 p.m. Jay Sebring was seen driving around 5:30 or 6, and the delivery driver who dropped off Abigail's new bicycle at the house between 7:30 and 8 said that Jay was the one who answered the door. So we know Jay has gotten to the house at this point. The delivery driver said nothing was unusual at this time. Sebring, Tate, Frykowski, and Folger might have gone to dinner that night, so the manager at a local restaurant recalled seeing Jay's name and party of 4 around 9:45 or 10, but no one in the restaurant could positively identify the group. So maybe they went, maybe they had a reservation and decided not to go, kind of unclear. Mrs. Folger called Abigail at home around 10 p.m., and she did answer, so we know that if they did go to dinner, they were back by 10, and she confirmed that she was taking a 10 a.m. flight to San Francisco the next morning. So a sergeant with the firearms and explosive unit was able to determine that the pieces of the gun grip belonged to a high-standard .22 caliber Longhorn revolver. So this gun had been introduced in 1967, and only 2,700 of them had been manufactured at this time. So they began circulating information about it at the gun stores that sold them. So tests were also conducted to see if Gerritsen really wouldn't have been able to hear anything from the guest house. The stereos at the guest house had been left on a 4 or 5, so they've used that volume for testing, and they did conclude that in the guest house with the stereo on, he would not have been able to hear gunshots or screams coming from the main house. So it was pretty loud, and they're like, okay, yeah, but if you have this on, you really can't hear anything. So a psychic claimed that there were 4 murderers at the Tate house and gave police their names, but after an extensive investigation, their alibis did check out. Truman Capote, who was author of In Cold Blood, went on The Tonight Show and said that these murders were committed by a single person. So having interviewed over 100 convicted murderers, he believed that he had the authority to make these assumptions. But at this time, police are like, no, there were at least 2 murderers here, which I feel like is a pretty valid...
Yeah, I mean...
There's 5 people.
There's 5 people. And I mean, even let's say Steve was, like, blindsided. Like, you know, like, surprise attack.
Mm-hmm.
Even so, when you get to the other 4 adults, 2 men...
Yep.
Like, you're really thinking one person can, like, do all of this damage and no one, like... People were stabbed, like, multiple times. Like... You gotta have more than one person.
Yeah, you can't stab one person 41 times while 3 other people are just like, oh, okay, I'll wait. Yeah. Like, that's not gonna happen. And especially where their bodies were found, like, they were fighting, they were running. Like, it wasn't like they were all in bed and, like, there were just 4 gunshot wounds to the head. You know, like, there's no way that this was just one person. But the Tate and LaBianca murder investigations did remain separate, because they're still like, nope, they're not connected in any way.
Yep.
So the notes for the LaBianca murders included trying to decipher the meanings of the words written on the wall. So they believed it was far-fetched, but they did note that the Beatles' most recent album included songs titled Helter Skelter, Piggies, and Blackbird. And Blackbird has the lyrics Arise, Arise, so like maybe that has something to do with this rise written on the wall. So at this point they're like, I don't think there's really any connection, but like, this is interesting, let's kind of keep this in the back of our brains, you know?
Anything you can get, honestly. You're like... Yeah. I mean, we gotta find something.
Something here. So on September 1st at around noon, 10-year-old Stephen Weiss found a gun next to a sprinkler and under a bush on the hill beside his house in Sherman Oaks. So he showed it to his father, who immediately contacted LAPD. There were 7 empty shell casings and 2 live rounds in the gun, and it was a .22 caliber high-standard Longhorn revolver, and it was dirty and rusty, and the trigger guard was broken as if it had been used to hit something, and the right-hand grip was also missing. So they contacted police who came and picked up the gun, but it wasn't until 3.5 months later and multiple phone calls from Weiss's father that the gun was picked up by the detectives on the Tate homicide case. So this whole time, LAPD is sending out flyers to gun stores, which is how Weiss happened to, realize, hey, I think this might be the murder weapon that they picked up at my house. And, he called and they were like, oh, no, we got it. So he called again and, finally they're like, okay, we'll look into it. So after 3 months, they realized they had the gun in their possession that they were sending out all these flyers trying to find. So good old LAPD just knocking it out of the park again.
Literally handed on a silver platter. Here you go.
We found it for you. We immediately called you. Here are all the... Wow.
It's honestly amazing that these cases were ever solved with how much buffoonery was going on in the LAPD.
If it wasn't for this one person that we'll get into here in a minute, they probably would not have been.
Yeah.
So Roman Polanski and some friends offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the murderers on September 10th. And Sharon's dad, Paul, had also retired from the army in August, and he was now out on the streets doing his own investigation into who killed his daughter. So it wasn't until October 15th that detectives on the LaBianca case reached out to the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office to see if they had any similar murders. So they were then informed of the Hinman murder, and they found them very similar, even though the detective on the Tate case had already been informed of this murder and was like, nah, not similar. Nope. So the week before, officers had raided Barker Ranch based on charges of grand theft auto and arson, among other charges, and arrested 24 members of a hippie cult called the Manson Family. So they were alerted to this group when they came across a piece of farm equipment that had been set on fire. On fire. On fire. Oh, this is... I don't think we're even close to done. Okay.
We're all struggling.
So it was later...
Me, you, and the listener.
So it was later said that the equipment was in their way from returning home to their camp, so they burned it down. Okay. So their leader, Charles Manson, was 34 years old and had a long criminal history. This group had also been arrested in a raid at Spahn's movie ranch on August 16th. So the Barker raid took 3 days, and during this time, 2 young girls named Stephanie Schramm and Kitty Lutzinger came out of some bushes a few miles away from the ranch and asked the officers for protection because they were trying to flee the family and they feared for their lives. So Kitty had been on the list of possible witnesses to the Hinman murder because she was the girlfriend of their primary suspect, Bobby Busolet. So detectives on the case drove out to interview Kitty. She was 17 years old and 5 months pregnant with Bobby's child. And he had disappeared from the ranch a few months earlier, but it wasn't until much later that other members of the family informed Kitty that he had been arrested and charged with the Hinman murder. So Kitty told detectives that Charles Manson had sent Bobby and a girl named Susan Atkins to Hinman's house to get money from him because they were friends and they had heard that he'd recently received a $20,000 inheritance. So he's like, oh, this guy's got some money. Why don't you go over there and get his money? So she didn't know who told her, but Kitty said that she heard there was a fight and that Hinman was killed. She said that Susan also mentioned that she had stabbed a man in the leg 3 or 4 times. So they're like, that's unusual because Hinman wasn't stabbed in the leg. But Voytek Frykowski was stabbed in the leg. And now they're like, we have 3 murders with words about pigs written on the wall and blood. Maybe there's some connection here.
Yeah.
So investigators are now wondering if all 3 murders are connected and if this Manson family could be responsible.
Good job, LAPD. You're finally there. Okay. So now we're going to jump back a little bit and we're going to talk about good old Charles Manson, the moment you've all been waiting for.
What? Who are we? What does he have to do with it?
So, Charles Manson was born no-name Maddox around November 12th, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Really? I'm 2 sentences
That's
in.
the one.
2 sentences in. Okay. He was the illegitimate son of a 16-year-old named Kathleen Maddox, and Kathleen was unable to remember his birthday, so the exact date is unknown, and the identity of his father has really never been verified, but Kathleen did file a bastardy suit against Colonel Scott of Ashland, Kentucky in 1936, and in 1937, the courts awarded a judgment of $25 plus $5 a month for child support. Kathleen was still trying to file for Colonel Scott's wages in 1940, as apparently, he didn't honor this judgment. And Colonel Scott most likely died in 1954, although none of this is verified. Some sources say his first name had never been known, and others say it could have been Walker. So, we don't know. His brother was also murdered, leading some to later believe Charlie may have been involved in that as well. So, Manson's later prison records also said that Manson's father may have been black, which possibly played a role in Manson's ideologies. And according to the allthat'sinteresting.com article, Kathleen said Colonel Scott was involved in Charlie's life until his death and would take him home for weekends. And other sources say they never met and that Charles didn't really even know for sure who his father was.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this birth parental relationship is just not known.
Yeah, and the source on allthat'sinteresting.com saying that Kathleen said this, I could only find that on All That's Interesting. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, so did she? Where is this coming from? I don't know. It's a lot of speculation.
She can't remember Charles' birthday, so I wouldn't be surprised if she's just yeah, he hung out with him all the time. What are you talking about?
Pull some shit out of my ass, yeah.
Seems like she was an alcoholic, and alcoholics say some not true shit a lot of the time.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point, Courtney.
Manson would later say that one time he was at a cafe with his mom when the waitress mentioned that she really wanted a child, and his mom was like, well, you can have him if you bring me a pitcher of beer. So the waitress brought her the extra pitcher, and when Kathleen finished it, she just left Manson behind. She just left him. She's like,
okay,
here you go. You said we had a deal. We had a gentleman's agreement here, so here you go.
He's yours now.
A few days later, Charles' uncle did find him and bring him home.
Which I'm also wondering, I'm maybe he would have turned out better if he just would have stayed with the waitress.
Maybe. I mean, I don't really know the waitress. She did bring an extra pitcher, so I don't know what that was about.
Well, it did say that she was like, oh, I think this lady's joking, but okay, I'll bring her some beer. And then she's like, oh, she left her kid. Okay.
She's like, I don't get paid enough for this.
No.
Nope, not at all. So Kathleen dated a lot of men, and Charles would later claim that she was a sex worker. She dated a much older man named William Manson, and this is when she had Charles' last name changed, but William didn't really stay in their lives for very long. And Kathleen would frequently just drop Charles off with a neighbor for an hour and leave for days or weeks. His grandmother or aunt would have to pick him up and keep him for a while. And he did bounce around between his mother in Ohio and the family members in Kentucky and West Virginia. So this is just not a great childhood. You're constantly left.
No.
I think we all know how important connections are with your parents, even if it's just your mom. And he doesn't have that at all. So
yeah, just completely abandoned by everyone. He's just a burden that people are like, okay, I guess it's your turn to keep him. I guess it's your turn to keep him.
Oh, well, Kathleen left Charles again. I guess it's my turn. So, in 1939, Kathleen and her brother were arrested for robbing a service station in Charleston, West Virginia, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. So, Charles went to live with his aunt at this time, and she became, very religious and strict with him. But Kathleen was paroled in 1942 and took over custody of Charles, who was 8 at the time. So all this we've talked about, the waitress and the beer and his mom going to jail and all these men, all this, 8 years. That's it.
Yeah, that's all.
They did live in various hotel rooms for the next few years, and his mother drank a lot, and so did the men that would come visit. And in 1947, she tried to put him into a foster home, but none were available. So at 12 years old, he was sent to the Gibbolet, I don't know, school for boys in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Indiana. You got that one, Courtney. I believe in you.
Indiana. School
Is it
for
giblet
boys.
like a turkey thing?
What?
Isn't a giblet something with a turkey?
Oh, yeah, I think it is.
The little...
Gibalt? Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, guys.
Giblet school.
Giblet school. You know, it's a school for boys, and it was probably real fucked up. So, here we go.
We should have made this 3 parts.
We should have made this 3
cluster.
parts. So, he was there for 10 months and then ran away and back to his mother. But Kathleen didn't want Charles staying with her, so he ran away again. He stole enough money from a grocery store to be able to rent his own room, and he broke into a few other stores to steal some things and got caught, so he was placed in a juvenile facility in Indianapolis. He escaped the next day, and when he was caught, they believed he was Catholic. Don't know why. So a local priest helped him get into Father Flanagan's Boys Town. Sounds sketch.
I don't like the name of that. That gives me the heebie-jeebies.
We know the history of priest in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound great.
Father Flanagan's Boys Town, I don't think there's good things going on over there.
But 4 days later, he and a classmate stole a car and committed 2 armed robberies. He was 13. So.
Again, all of these things in his life up to this point, and now he's just now 13.
He's just 13. Like, ugh, that's crazy. So the 2 went to stay with the classmate's uncle, who used them to help steal from stores because they were able to like slip through skylights. And they were caught, and Charles was sent to the Indiana School for Boys at Plainfield. And he lived there for 3 years and ran away 18 times during this. So
no stability at all in this person's life.
In February of 1951, Charles did escape with 2 other boys, and they went to California. They stole a car and burglarized gas stations along the way, but they were caught just outside Beaver, Utah. Because driving a stolen car across state lines is a federal offense, Charles went to the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. until he turned 18 years old. There's a lot of school for boys, and it really makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because we all know these aren't good schools. So the caseworker there labeled him as aggressively antisocial. His IQ was 109 and he was illiterate. While here, he was examined by a psychiatrist who said he was just desperate for love and affection because of his lack of parental love and security, which, I mean, with this childhood, how could you not grow up having issues? Like, you're going to. He did agree to a few months of psychotherapy, and the psychiatrist believed that experiences that would build up his self-confidence would help improve his mental state, and he recommended that he be moved to Natural Bridge Camp, which is a minimum security institution, and he was transferred in October of 1951. So he turned 17 the next month, and shortly after, his aunt came forward and said she would give him a job and a place to live if he was released. So he was up for parole in February, and chances, were looking good. They're like, okay, he has a place to live, he has a job, we can maybe, make him a good member of society again. However, less than a month before his hearing, he held a razor blade to another boy's throat while he sodomized him. Because of this, he was transferred to the Federal Reformatory in Petersburg, Virginia. He committed 8 serious offenses in his first 8 months there, 3 of them involving sexually assaulting other men. And it was decided that he needed to be sent to a more secure facility, so he went to Chillicothe, Ohio in September of 1952. They described him as criminally sophisticated despite his young age and said he needed to be supervised at all times. I mean, look at his history, while in jail. He's not, behaving at all.
No.
Then he just suddenly changed, and there were just no more incidents for the rest of the year. He worked in the transportation unit where he repaired and maintained vehicles, and he was active in the education program where he raised his reading and math levels. He was given a Meritorious Service Award in January of 1954, and on May 8th, 1954, he was granted parole at 19 years old. So it kind of seems like maybe he's turning a new leaf, maybe he's getting his shit together. So one of the conditions of his parole was that he lived with his aunt and uncle. And he also stayed with his mother when she moved nearby as well. In January of 1955, he married a 17-year-old waitress at the local hospital named Rosalie Jean Willis. So Charles worked as a busboy, service station attendant, and parking lot attendant. He also continued to steal cars, even taking them across state lines again, so didn't really learn his lesson too much.
Nope.
And in July of 1955, he stole a car from Bridgeport, Ohio, and drove to Los Angeles with his pregnant wife. And he was arrested less than 3 months later and asked for psychiatric help because of his time spent in institutions. A psychiatrist examined him on October 26, 1955, and his report stated that Manson had spent 9 years in institutions, and he was afraid it only made him more removed from society. And with a wife and now a baby on the way, he might be able to straighten himself out. Like, we just think he's just, like, not adjusting back to normal life. Like, maybe there's still hope. He did recommend probation, and the courts agreed and sentenced him to 5 years probation. He still had another hearing for another grand theft auto charge, but he skipped it, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. He was picked up in Indianapolis in March of 1956 and returned to LA, where he was sentenced to 3 years in prison, and his first son, Charles Manson Jr., was born during this time. So, Charles' mother moved to California and lived with Rosalie and Charles Jr., and they both visited in prison, but Rosalie did visit more than his mother did, and then she just suddenly stopped visiting in March of 1957, and his mom did tell him that she was living with another man. Charles was transferred to the Coast Guard unit on April 10th. He was found in the parking lot in civilian clothes trying to hotwire a car. Again, you know, he's trying to be Houdini. He's just trying to escape everywhere he is. So, he pleaded guilty to the escape attempt, and an additional 5 years probation was added to his current sentence, and his parole request was denied. Rosalie filed for divorce, and that was finalized in 1958. She did have full custody of Charles Jr. and never spoke to Charles or his mother again. Charles was released from prison on September 30th, 1958, with 5 years parole. And on May 1st, 1959, he was arrested for attempting to cash a forged U.S. Treasury check at a supermarket. He said he'd stolen the check from a mailbox, which added on 2 more federal offenses for Manson. So LAPD turns him over to the Secret Service, and one of their reports reads, "Unfortunately for them, the check itself has disappeared. They feel certain the subject took it off the table and swallowed it when they momentarily turned their backs." Which all I can think of is It's Always Sunny. Like, Charlie,
Same.
he keeps, like, eating the paper, and he's like,
Same.
it doesn't exist.
Yes. I mean, that's one way to get rid of evidence, you know?
Yeah.
Pretty smart.
So, he accepted a plea, he accepted a deal to plead guilty to forging the check, and they would just drop the mail fraud charge. Despite recommendations that he not receive probation, he was given a 10-year sentence, which was suspended, and he's back on probation.
Whew.
He was later arrested that year. Big surprise. I know you guys are shocked.
Didn't see that coming.
For grand theft auto and using stolen credit cards. He took 2 women to New Mexico for the purpose of selling sex, which is a federal offense. He was held briefly and then released. He then married one of the girls named Leona, possibly to prevent her from testifying against him. Charles then put out an ad for an airline stewardess school, and when 2 girls from Detroit responded to the ad, he stole their money and raped one of them. He actually got her pregnant, and she lost the baby in an ectopic pregnancy. And a bench warrant is issued for Manson's arrest, and he was picked up on June 1st in Laredo, Texas, and he was sent back to prison to finish out his 10-year sentence for violating his parole. So I don't know why they kept giving him chances, but they're like, dude, you're out. You're out. Like, you just got to serve this time.
I mean, clearly he is a master manipulator, so, like, people are just taken in by him, and they're like, oh, yeah, he'll change, and he'll do better, and let me give him this chance that turns him around.
Yeah.
Did not work.
So, record from this prison sentence said that Manson commented that institutions have become his way of life, and he receives security in institutions which is not available to him in the outside world, which, I mean, I could almost kind of see, because it's like,
yeah,
you get up in the morning and you can do this, and then you go to bed, and it's this structure that he's never had in his life.
Yeah, like, it's a stable life for the first time. Like, a sense of, like security, like you said, like, you know exactly what's going to happen. That stability.
Yeah. He also said his religion was Scientology, and that he never settled upon a religious formula for his beliefs, and is presently seeking an answer to his question in the new mental health cult known as Scientology. And on October 1st, 1963, prison officials were informed that according to court records, Charles was married to Leno Manson in 1959 in California, and that marriage was terminated by divorce in Denver, Colorado on April 10th, 1963, on the grounds of mental cruelty and conviction of a felony. One child, Charles Luther Manson, is alleged to have been of his union, and this is like the only reference in any records to his second marriage and child. And, like, Charles, can you please stop naming your sons after you? Like,
yeah,
please stop. So, when the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand became the #1 song on the U.S. record charts in January of 1964, Manson became obsessed with the Beatles. He was jealous of their success, and he told other inmates he could be bigger than the Beatles. He'd been playing the guitar more frequently, and records from May of 1966 that he had written about 80 or 90 songs and hoped to sell them when he was released from prison. And as his 10-year prison term was coming to an end, Manson actually begged to remain in prison and said he didn't think he could adjust to the outside world because prison was his home now. But his request was denied, and I bet those people are kicking themselves now. He was released from prison at 8:15 a.m. on March 21st, 1967, and driven to Los Angeles.
Which I feel like anytime a prisoner has, like, begged to stay in, they go on to commit other crimes to go back to prison. I mean, there has to be, I mean, I get, like, okay, we can't just have taxpayer dollars, like, keeping these people in a home and fed and everything forever, but it's like, are there no programs that exist to, like, assist with this type of situation? I don't know.
They barely exist now, let alone in the 60s.
True.
So Charles then went to San Francisco, which is where the Manson family would form that spring. He was 32 years old and had spent more than half of his life in an institution. And at that point, how the hell are you ever going to adjust back? You're not. Like, you're not. While in prison, Manson noted that the pimps, quote, we're using the terminology of this time, were respected, so he wanted to do that as well, but he needed to find some loyal girls. But the problem was he couldn't really keep girls around. They weren't staying like he needed them to. So he did receive some advice from another man in prison that he needed to do the following to keep his girls loyal. 1, use fear and intimidation. 2, become the greatest lover in the girl's life. And 3, make her feel fully loved. So he planned to use these tactics to kind of build a network of sex workers once out of prison, but sex was changing in the late 60s and he kind of needed to adapt. So he's like, okay, it's not the same as I was thinking. I'm going to have to pivot here a little bit. So he still used the tactics mentioned, but framed it as he's forming a family, not a network of sex workers. Like, we're just one big happy family.
Because it's like, oh, like, the free love movement, like, everyone's having sex with everyone. Like, if I try to recruit these girls and, like, act as their pimp, like, they're not going to want to do that because that's not what's happening right now. But, like, oh, like, we all just, like, have sex together and it's fun and friendly. And, yeah, I can do that. But, like, he's still using these manipulation tactics that he learned from this guy in prison the whole time, you know?
Yeah. Manson would often panhandle and play his guitar near the entrance to the University of California, and he was doing this when 23-year-old librarian Mary Brunner approached, so they started talking, and they soon moved in together. Manson wanted to bring another girl to live with them, and she originally said no, but then agreed. But then soon there were 18 girls living with them. So, like, she was like, I agreed to 1, and now you bring all these girls. Like, how do you even bring that conversation up to begin with, let alone now you have 18 in there?
And clearly this happened in a very short time period. This wasn't like years and years and it slowly built. It's like, wait, whoa.
Whoa. How do you have enough rooms? So the Manson family is now born. So Mary left her job and gave birth to Manson's third son, Michael Manson. He's finally naming his children something else.
Yes.
And the whole family participated in the delivery, with Charles biting off the umbilical cord, which makes me want to vomit.
Yeah.
How are your teeth so sharp, too? Anyway.
And that's full of blood. Like, Andrew wouldn't even cut Millie's with a pair of scissors.
Yeah. So, after Michael's birth, they packed up a school bus and left for somewhere they could get away from the man. You know, that man. So they eventually landed at Spahn Ranch. So George Spahn owned this ranch where many movies and TV shows had been made. And at this time, their main business was just renting horses to weekend riders. So, you can be like, hey, come rent the horses. And you could probably also be like, you remember Gunsmoke? It was filmed over here. I don't know if Gunsmoke was filmed there. That's the only old Western I can think of.
I think it was. I might be pulling this out my ass, but I'm pretty sure I remember reading that.
It sounds right. And
we'll go
at
with
this
it.
point, everyone's gone because this episode is 7 hours long. So.
It's just us here, so whatever we say doesn't matter. We can make up our own thing.
So, George was 81 and mostly blind. His ranch hand, Ruby Pearl, handled all of his business on the ranch during the day. And Charles Manson arrived at the ranch in August of 1968 and asked if he could stay a few days. Spoiler, it was longer. He also didn't tell George he had 25 or 30 people with him. And I'm just thinking, because he is mostly blind, I'm like, is Charles just like, everyone be really, really quiet? Like,
it's just me and a few girls. It's all
me
good.
and my wife and our son. Don't mind the people behind the curtain. And at this point, Charles did assign Lynette Squeaky Fromm to look after George. So Squeaky had been with Manson for over a year and was actually one of the first women to join the family. So she took care of George by cooking and cleaning for him, and they also had a sexual relationship. And their plan was for George to fall for Squeaky so that he would leave the ranch to her when he died. Manson had his girls perform sexual favors for many things, including money, vehicles, and later weapons, and he essentially had his network of sex workers, but the girls didn't really view themselves that way because they thought they were just doing whatever they could to make their lover and leader happy. So they're like, no, I'm not a sex worker, like I'm just doing something for my lover, basically.
I'm just doing a favor. He wants me to have sex with this guy who's going to give him weapons. Like, okay, I'm not a sex worker. This will make Charles happy, so I'll do it. It's fine.
And like Charles, man, like 30, like around 30 women, like that you're making them feel so loved, like, whew, that's a lot of work. Hard enough to keep my one happy, let alone 30.
Right.
Manson would hit the girls if they disobeyed and told them they didn't have a father figures in their lives, so they needed someone to discipline them and teach about men's roles and women's roles. So clearly he's using abuse here as well. He would also panhandle in the street and preach about his philosophies. If he saw any young girls nodding along in agreement, he would get this girl's attention, go over to her, they'd make her feel loved and important, and they would recruit her into the family. The moment you've all been waiting for, we are going to pause here for part 2. So you kind of know about Manson, you kind of know how his family started. We're going to get back into the murders, like in part 2, and more into the investigations, all that. If you want to listen immediately, sign up for Patreon, and next week when part 2 comes out to the public, you'll get a bonus where we kind of are also talking about this in association with the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So if you want to do that, just take note of that, but we are pausing here.
Yes, and very quickly, Courtney, what is your perk of the week so we can wrap up this episode?
Yes, my laptop is almost dead. So,
yes, laptop, phone, AirPods, everything is dying.
Yes. So my perk of the week, I'm going to keep it short and sweet, is Ben & Jerry's half-baked ice cream. Yum. I have never had this ice cream before. I've had Ben & Jerry's. I was always a fish food girl.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I don't eat that much ice cream. But anyway, I was always a fish food girl. That was my Ben & Jerry's like flavor. I didn't really buy it too much. But the other day, I really wanted a Sonic Blast, and Sonic was closed. And so Kevin and I ran to the store, and I saw that it had cookie dough and brownie and chocolate and vanilla, which is basically my 4 favorite words. So I bought it, and it was incredible. And now I'm a little mad at myself for opening that can of worms, because now I'm going to want it all the time.
Yeah, Half-Baked is my favorite Ben & Jerry's. It is so good. Delicious.
I mean, this is kind of who I am as a person. I had the fish food. I loved it, and I never tried another flavor because I loved it. Why change it? So
Same way.
So, that is my perk of the week. Go get Ben & Jerry's Half-Baked. Ben & Jerry's is also a great company in general who aligns with my political and all that views. So you are supporting like a good company, even if it's kind of a big corporation. But that's my perk of the week. Jaclyn, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week, Courtney and I both love the author Sarah Dessen, and she, one of her books was recently turned into a movie, which was just released on Netflix yesterday as of the time of this recording, and I was actually able to watch it last night because my daughter would not be put down yesterday, so I couldn't do anything else, so I guess I'll watch this movie. So, but it is called Along for the Ride, and it was wonderful. Like, I thought it was done so well. I thought it was a great translation from the book to the movie. Sarah Dessen was a part of creating the movie, so that always helps when the author is involved. But it was really good. It's a like a teen, movie and a coming of age summer story, but wonderful. Highly recommend it. Very uplifting if you need something after
it's what we all need in our life after the past few weeks. It's been a time.
So definitely check that out. Like Courtney said, if you want part 2 immediately, it is on patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes, and you will also get a bonus next week. And you can find us on Instagram at caffeinatedcrimespod. You can find us on Twitter at caffcrimespod. That's CAFF crimespod. You can find us on Facebook at Caffeinated Crimes Podcast, or you can email us at caffeinatedcrimespod@gmail.com.
Yeah, and we're on the TikTok, we're on the YouTube. You can find us. We say this every time. You know where we are. But yeah, in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.